Thank you, everyone, for being here, and thank you, Mike, for joining us. This has been a fun backstage, just chit-chat and preparation for this conversation. So for those who don't know, Mike Maples is co-founder and partner at Floodgate. He's been on the Forbes Midas list 8 times in the last decade and also named Rising Star by Fortune. Before, he was known for his role in backing transformational startups like Twitter, Lyft, Twitch, Okta, and Outreach. He was involved as a founder and an operating executive at many incredible organizations. Mike, we have so many things we want to discuss. I want to talk about the book. I want to talk about your views on venture. I guess we'll talk about AI because apparently everyone's talking about AI. But maybe let's start a little bit with, you've been in venture for more than 20 years?
Almost 20 years, yeah.
Yeah. What surprises you about venture today that you wouldn't have thought would have happened 20 years ago?
Just how noisy it's gotten, so there's, it's hard to imagine, but I remember 20 years ago, I'd be sitting at El Fornillo with Josh Koppelman, and we'd be saying, how is it not obvious to people that seed funding is going to become gigantic someday? And what are we seeing that nobody else sees, or what are they seeing that we don't see? But from where we were sitting, it was just obvious that seed investing would become huge. But I never envisioned that, you go onto LinkedIn now, and if you type in seed investor, there's probably more of those than there are founders.
Totally.
Right? So it just utterly transformed the number of people that are, writing checks for startups.
How many seed investors were there when you started?
I don't think you could have
counted them.
You obviously
named one, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, Josh and I used to talk about it, and we thought maybe there was $100 million of organized capital in the world for pure seed.
Wow.
Time. And if I saw a project that was interesting, I didn't have enough money to do it by myself, and so I'd call Josh, or he'd call me, or we'd call Steve Anderson. But there just wasn't that many people doing it at the time.
Yeah, and it sounds like venture was a lot more collaborative.
Yeah.
There was limited capital, but an unlimited amount of ideas. And so how did you go about, and you just called it a project. Yeah. As opposed to today, you talk to a company, they already had it formed and incorporated, and they are, 300K in ARR or whatever it is.
Yeah, I'd say that's the top way I evolved my strategy over time. So in the late 2000s, if you had said, I think seed investing is going to matter, you would have had to convince people. Most people just didn't think it was going to matter. And then all of a sudden everything changed and there were thousands of seed funds. And so I concluded that what I needed to do was find a way to meet the founders before they'd figured their ideas out. So a more recent investment is Applied Intuition, which I invested in 2017. And I'd spent 14 months with Kasser Yunus before we wrote a check. So more and more what I'm trying to do is predict who I think is going to be a good founder and spend time with them and have a reason to get to know them before there's a startup.
I want to come back to predicting things and predicting how great people are going to be. But before we kind of go back before we talk a little bit about people, let's talk a little bit about the book, because the book is all about people. The book is about stories and real stories that you've captured. And kind of share with us a little bit about the actual process. One, deciding to write a book, choosing that as your content strategy. Why that, of all things, when you could have done LinkedIn like everyone else? And then second, what was the process to get about to writing Pattern Breakers?
Yeah, so I guess sometimes people write books because they're smart experts in an area. Mine got started because of an unsettling observation. So around 2014, Twitch was acquired by Amazon for $970 million, and we made 84 times our money. And
I'm sorry, say that again?
Yeah, we made 84 times our money. And normally that's good, and it was good. But here's the thing, I didn't remember that I was a shareholder in Twitch.
Mike, I'm sorry.
So
you didn't remember you were a shareholder?
Yeah, I'd invested in this company called Justin TV, which was a terrible idea. And it had morphed into 2 companies, SocialCam and Twitch. And I was like, okay, well, clearly SocialCam's the real company, because why is anybody going to want to watch other people stream video games? And so SocialCam gets bought for $65 million. I just thought that was the company.
Wow.
So I didn't have it in my financials. So you can imagine, I'm calling my LPs, and I said, I got good news and bad news. The bad news is this isn't how we like to do things at Floodgate. And I know we have audited financials, and I don't have any record of us having shares of this company. But the good news is we do have these shares, and we're made 84 times our money. And should I restate my financials? And every LP was like, nope, we're good. Just send us a check. And I got some good champagne in the deal, so that was good.
Oh, great.
But if you zoom out, you start to say, okay, well, am I just a lucky fool? Mm-hmm. Because 85% of my exit profits in my first 10 years in the business came from pivots. And so, Twitter started as a podcasting company called Odeo. Twitch started as a terrible idea called Justin TV. Chegg started out as classifieds for college. Chegg and Twitter went public within a week of each other, and both were crazy pivots. And so I, Nassim Taleb in The Black Swan and Fooled by Randomness talks about this character called the Lucky Fool. And I thought maybe I'm just a lucky fool, in which case I should retire before I get exposed. And so that's kind of the genesis of it. I went on this rabbit hole project trying to figure out what was I getting accidentally right or what was I missing, with some of these. And so I spent about 3 years researching it, but there would have never been a book if it weren't for Peter Ziebelman. So he was teaching a class at Stanford Business School, and increasingly he would invite me to come in for the lectures, and then he would invite me to come in for a couple of lectures, and he started to change how he was teaching the class a little bit. And so he was really the person that persuaded me that we should write these thoughts down.
Yeah, the Twitch story is kind of insane and I'm sure many folks have had these experiences too. I can't say it's an individual experience, but Twitch is an incredible, as you said, potentially lucky, but also, choice that you chose to be in that company in the first place. You, in Pattern Breakers, cover the stories of people, of choices you've made and choices maybe you haven't made.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about the choices that you didn't make and the stories around that. I would love to hear about the Airbnb.
Yeah, so there was this startup called Air Bed and Breakfast, and it was very unfortunate timing. So my partner Ann Muraco and I, co-founded Floodgate together, and one time I invited this company in to pitch us called Mojo Mix. And it's a cereal company, and you go online and you specify your cereal ingredients, and then it ships you the cereal in a box. And the meeting's over with, and Ann goes, why are we wasting our time talking to this company? I wish them well, but it's not our business. And I said, okay, that's fair. I tend to be more optimistic about taking the meetings. And so a week later, we get pitched by Air Bed and Breakfast, and we walk into the conference room, and it's full of cereal boxes.
Oh, gosh.
Obama O's and Captain McCain Crunch. And Ann looks at me like, Maples, what the hell?
It's another
cereal company, second one this week. And I'm looking at her like, no, I thought it's Air Bed and Breakfast. It was introduced to me by Michael Seibel. I was under the impression it was a tech company. And so Brian Chesky says, we got this thing, it's called Air Bed and Breakfast. You give somebody an air mattress and they sleep in your apartment, and you serve them Pop-Tarts the next morning, and Air Bed and Breakfast. And I said, great, can we see it? And he goes, yeah, Michael Seibel tells me you don't like slides, you like demos. So I'm like, that's right, show me the demo. He tries to fire up the product, he can't get the product to work.
Oh gosh.
So we're sitting there in this conference room, we're 20 minutes into this meeting, still just looking at each other in a room full of cereal boxes. And I just wasn't awake to the possibility. And then I asked him, doesn't couchsurfing.com do this? Isn't it free? And so I just didn't see it. And I should have. One of the reasons I wrote the book as well is I started to try to understand what did I get wrong, what did I miss, when it came to Airbnb.
Yeah, and I mean Airbnb is obviously one such story, but there have been amazing successes too.
Yeah.
And there are some of the stories you capture, and maybe share with the audience for folks who haven't read the book, one of the stories that kind of, I would say, exemplifies what you talk a little bit about as the inflection. You talk a lot about inflections. You just said we've been lucky to be in business with a lot of companies that pivoted.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what you mean by inflection, and talk about a little bit about a company that kind of exemplifies that.
Sure. So if I had to net out what I've learned, it's that startup capitalism is a different kind of capitalism. And so business is never a fair fight. The only question is who gets to fight unfair. And in the default, the incumbents fight unfair because they have the advantage of the incumbency.
Sure.
So the startup has to have a way to compete. And a startup capitalist doesn't add value in a normal way. They don't compound their advantages because they have nothing. Mm-hmm. There's nothing to compound. They don't extend their moats because they've got no moat to protect. And so the way a startup capitalist wins is by changing the subject. So like in the world of startups, better doesn't matter. Better means your upside is capped by the rules set by the incumbents, right? And so what a startup needs is a weapon to wage asymmetric warfare on the present. And the way they do that is they harness inflections. And so like one company that my partner Ann invested in, Lyft, the inflection was the iPhone 4S shipped with a GPS chip in it. And Uber leveraged that same inflection, right, to do ride sharing. But Instacart and DoorDash used it for food delivery and groceries and stuff like that. So the inflection gives the entrepreneur the ability to offer a product that radically alters human capacities and behaviors. And so I like to say that if a startup has to be compared with something in the present, it's going to lose. Because why would you do business with a startup if you have any alternative that's reasonable? You won't. And so you have to force a choice and not a comparison when you're a startup. And the inflections are the thing that gives you the weapon to force that choice.
Yeah. And on that point of, you talk about the present, living in the present, and then you talk a little bit about that sort of secret weapon or the horsepower being in the inflection.
Yeah.
But you also talk a lot about living in the future.
Yes.
And that's what, as venture capitalists, we're expected to do. And kind of, as you said, with Air Bed and Breakfast, you couldn't see it. What does living in the future mean? Is it we have to believe that, we're all going to have holographic meetings tomorrow? Or is it something that is so pertinent to the business that you're talking about?
Yeah, so when I say living in the future, I mean it in a very literal sense, like living as a verb. And so like most people, when they think about vision, they think who's got better binoculars or who can see, the future better crystal ball. Like I think that the best founders I've worked with, William Gibson was right when he said that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And so I believe that most great startup ideas exist in a pocket of the future that's visited the founder before it's visited the rest of us. And it's not my job necessarily to know what the future is or even live in it, but it's my job to be a good judge of who is and to judge the authenticity of the founder when they describe the future that they're living in. And so it's a little bit Zen, but one of the things I learned was if you want to have a great startup idea, don't try to think of a startup. Because if you try to think of a startup, you'll orient yourself in the present and you'll try to solve present pain for present people with conventional problems. What you want to do is you want to live in the future and experience firsthand the pattern breaking potential of these new inflections.
Yeah.
And by experiencing it firsthand, you encounter the limits of your ability to get the most out of it. And so most of the best ideas I've seen come from living in the future and building what's missing in the future.
Yeah. Living in the future, I think you allude to don't solve for the today, don't find the startup, let the startup come to you. Testing for authenticity in all of this is so critical, right? And we talk about how do you find a founder who has either lived experience and so they really feel the pain, or they really believe in this concept of what the future will look like. Yep. It is a very difficult thing to test for authenticity because there is a fine line between authenticity and being sold.
Yes.
And how are you making that decision? How's the firm making that decision?
Yeah, so Ann and I have this saying that it's important not to confuse charisma with obsession, right? And so there's this saying, Isaac Newton was at a party and somebody came to him and said, why is it that when the apple fell on your head, you thought about gravity? And he said, because I was thinking about it all the time. And so that's the thing, right? These founders that I work with that have had the best results, they're thinking about it all the time.
Right.
And they're not thinking about it because they want to raise a round somewhere with somebody. They're obsessed with it, and they're gonna do it regardless of you, the VC, or me, the VC. They're pursuing what's interesting to them for its own sake.
Yeah.
And they're thinking about it all the time. And that's why Louis Pasteur was right when he said that chance favors the prepared mind. Like I learned a lot about this by studying artists and scientists and like who comes up with these breakthroughs and why is that happens. And what you realize is that prepared minds are more likely to be visited by luck because they're pursuing fractals of knowledge that nobody else thinks is a good use of time.
Yeah.
And they're pursuing fractals of knowledge and they're opening up new vistas of knowledge because they're legitimately obsessively interested in it. And ironically, that's how you come up with the breakthroughs, because there can't be a recipe for one, right? You can only find it by exploring the unexplored.
Yeah.
And so that's what I really look for is, do I believe that this founder came by this idea honestly because they were thinking about it all the time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that Isaac Newton story is exemplary in terms of everyone being left with that. On that point, I think a lot of founders can authentically believe it, but they also create these movements around them. They have to be able to create the movement. They have to be able to inspire, bring all these great people behind them, and then be able to tell the world their story.
Yes.
And storytelling, I think, is something that we almost anchor too much on as venture capitalists, because we want to find the person who can sell that story to us and sell that story to customers and whoever that may be. But tell us a little bit give us an example. Tell us about somebody who you think really built a movement with a specific type of persona to start behind their business.
Almost all of the ones that I've worked with or wish that I worked with have. And so here's the way, like I like to geek out a lot on stories, because stories existed before even the written word. And so a good story will trigger your involuntary reflexes. It'll cause you to sweat. It'll cause you to, it'll cause a quickening of your heartbeat. So I like to say that a great story is like a hero's journey. So let's take Lyft, for example. The hero is living in the world that is, which is a mundane world. So Luke Skywalker on Tatooine kind of stuff. But in this case, it's a rider in San Francisco who can't get a taxi cab, and parking's a pain, and it's expensive, your car gets broken into. And so then there's the mentor, which in Star Wars, like Obi-Wan.
Yeah. In
this case, it's the founder. And it's remarkable, the parallel. So the mentor has to show up with a new tool and a new magic. And in Star Wars, the new tool was the lightsaber and the magic was the Force. In the case of Lyft, it was the ride-sharing app. But it was also this just ability to have the insight that you could share rides, that you could get in a stranger's car and feel safe. Why is that important? Well, early customers of a startup are animated by belief. They don't buy for practical reasons. They buy for aesthetic reasons. They buy because they believe in the founder's aesthetically superior future. And so the person wants to be a hero in their own transformational hero's journey. And so the founder's role is not to be Luke, it's to be Obi-Wan. It's to be the mentor who shows up with a tool and the magic. And they need those things because as a hero in my journey as a customer, I need to have a credible belief that I have a chance to survive.
Yeah.
Right? So if I'm Luke Skywalker, Obi-Wan can't just be talking nonsense. He's got to tell me a story that's going to cause me to say, well, maybe I do have a chance to take on Darth Vader and the Death Star and all that stuff. But it's remarkable, the parallels. And so what I've come to realize is that every story starts with the mundane world that is, and it tells a story about the ideal world that could be. And you make all of the early set of people who you want to believe your story into co-conspirators.
Right.
And so you have this positive conspiracy theory to change the future. So the founder actually co-creates the future with their early customers and employees.
Creating sub-heroes in some ways.
Yeah, and so it's important as a founder to know that when you're talking to an investor, you got to tell a different story than if you're talking to a customer or an employee, because they all have different motivations about what it means to be a hero.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I definitely want to keep talking about pattern breakers, but I do also want to pick your brains on kind of the world of venture today. I mean, as you said, you've been doing this 20 years and you're building a generational firm, but is venture capital here to stay? I'm curious, what are your thoughts? How does AI disrupt all of what we're doing? Are your and my jobs completely replaceable?
I think it's here to stay. I think it's the dynamics are persistent in the sense that there's a tiny number of companies that are truly exceptional, and there's a tiny number of investors who habitually invest in those companies. And I don't think that's really changed in all the time I've been doing this. Sometimes it's noisier, sometimes it's less noisy. But the physics of a good fund are remarkably consistent through time. So I look at it like if I want to be really good, 5% of my first checks, I need to make 100x on the first check. And about another 10% or so, I need to make more than 20x. If I can do that, I'm going to be pretty good. And so people ask me things about valuations and all that. I'm like, the rule is still the same. If the valuations are higher, you just have to have a bigger exit. But the objective function is roughly the same, and it's fairly persistent through time.
And as you think about, I mean, today I think there's going to be a bunch of other VCs talking about their experience. There's folks out there talking to LPs about, the software they're using, the tools they're using. AI is somewhat supercharging our businesses, but it's also supercharging all of us. How do you guys think about sort of tools that you're using in-house, or the better way to make a decision whether it's using technology or not?
Yeah, I think that AI really rewards the system level thinker. And so for better or worse, I have this pathology. I keep a database of 100-bagger startups, and I study the heck out of them. I try to interview the founders. I try to get this pitch deck of when it was a seed round. I try to get a time capsule of everything about it. And the reason is I just want to know more about those startups than anybody's ever known. And AI lets me run analyses in a million different directions that no rational person would ever put up with. And so, like, if you're legitimately curious about something, you can combine it with the AI, I think, to do really amazing things.
Yeah.
I'm pretty excited about it. It's probably the most exciting thing I've seen in my time in the industry.
So using AI to continue pattern matching.
Yeah, and I probably use it. I'm probably in these AI tools like 4 or 5 hours a day now.
Yeah.
If anything, my team's getting a little bit spooked by it. Yeah.
Well, I have a couple of rapid fire questions,
Sure.
and we'll make it very fast. What was the last investment that you did and why?
It was a company. It is a company called Created by Humans. So Trip Adler was in the process of thinking about leaving Scribd. So Trip started Scribd, I think 15 years ago, maybe longer. Grew it to 200 million, and he had this idea to help authors license their LLM rights and their AI rights. And I liked that idea because I thought that it was a potential natural monopoly type of scenario, and Trip knows all the publishers from his Scribd days, and he knows all the YC founders and all that stuff. And so I thought I liked our chances in that one. So that was the recent one.
If you were starting your career today, what would you do differently?
I would be having even higher standards on the folks I want to go into business with. I just think that greatness is so rare. And sometimes I can get fooled by how compelling an idea is or exciting something is, and I can sometimes overlook whether or not the team is going to have the ability to really bring the stuff to it.
Yeah.
And I just think it's hard to bend the arc of the present to a radically different future. It just takes a lot of gumption.
Totally.
So yeah.
Last question: a belief you hold about startups that you would assume most other VCs disagree with?
I would say that execution doesn't matter as much as some think, in my opinion. So I like to invest in something where even if we execute badly, we'll succeed. And so I like the idea to be so compelling in pattern breaking that even if we stumble and can't get out of our own way half the time, we still win. And so I like to run that thought experiment. Even if we don't execute well, can we still do well at this?
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for the time, Mike, and thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, Aditi. Thanks.